He was just a farmhand with calloused hands and a heart bigger than the Montana sky, living in a cabin that had seen better days. She was a millionaire lost in a blizzard, about to bring new life into the world with no one to help her but a stranger. What happened next wasn't just a story of survival. It was about two souls from different worlds finding what they never knew they were missing. If you believe in fate, second chances, and the kind of courage that blooms in life's harshest winters, before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Now, let me take you back to the night of the blizzard and the miracle that followed. Noah Miller tightened his worn scarf around his neck and peered through the frost-covered window of his small cabin. The wind howled like a wounded animal, flinging snow against the glass in angry swirls. The blizzard had been raging for nearly 2 days now, the worst Montana had seen in decades, according to the static-filled radio broadcast he'd managed to catch before the power went out. He stoked the fire in the old wood stove, watching as the flames licked hungrily at the seasoned pine. The cabin was drafty, but the heat from the stove made it bearable. Noah had learned to appreciate small comforts since coming to work at the Wilkinson farm 3 years ago. After losing everything, his job in construction, his apartment in Chicago, and nearly his sobriety, the remote farmhand position had been his salvation. Here, miles from town, his only companions were the horses in the barn, the ancient border collie named Duke, who now snored by the fire, and occasionally old man Wilkinson, who lived in the main farmhouse a quarter-mile up the road. Noah ran a hand through his dark hair, still damp from checking on the animals one last time before the night set in completely. At 35, his face had begun to show the lines of a hard life, weathered by both sun and sorrow, but his eyes remained clear and steady, the kind of eyes that had seen rock bottom and climbed back up, one painful step at a time. "Just you and me tonight, Duke," he murmured to the sleeping dog. "Let's hope the roof holds." That's when he heard it, faint at first, almost indistinguishable, from the wind's moan. Noah froze, head tilted, straining to listen. There it was again, a sound that didn't belong to the storm. A car horn, desperate and insistent, coming from the direction of the narrow road that ran past the property. Noah grabbed his heavy coat and flashlight. "Stay, Duke," he commanded, though the old dog hadn't stirred. He shoved his feet into insulated boots and wrapped a second scarf around the lower half of his face before opening the door. The wind slammed against him immediately, nearly knocking him back. Snow poured into the cabin in a white rush. Squinting against the onslaught, Noah stepped outside and pulled the door shut behind him. The beam of his flashlight cut a feeble path through the swirling snow as he trudged forward. The horn continued, though now it sounded more sporadic, weaker. Noah's breath came in visible puffs that were immediately torn away by the wind. His exposed skin burned with cold. The snowdrifts reached past his knees in places, making each step a battle. It took him nearly 15 minutes to reach the road, though it was barely 200 yards from his cabin. By then, the horn had stopped completely. Noah swept his flashlight in a wide arc, trying to see through the sheets of falling snow. At first, nothing. Then, a glint of metal. He moved closer. There, half buried in a snowdrift where the road curved sharply, was a vehicle. Not just any vehicle, but a sleek, black luxury SUV, the kind that cost more than Noah would make in 5 years. The driver's side door was partially open, snow already accumulating on the leather seat. Noah's heart rate quickened as he approached, calling out, "Hello? Anyone there?" His voice seemed small against the storm's rage. No answer came from inside the vehicle. Noah shined his light through. The windows, empty. He checked the ignition, keys still there, the vehicle silent. The battery must have died from the continuous horn. His flashlight beam caught something on the passenger seat, a designer handbag, its contents spilled out. A wallet, a smartphone, and what looked like a hospital admittance form. Noah picked up the paper, brushing off snow. The form was for an obstetrics department, dated just yesterday. Patient name, Elizabeth Harrington. The emergency contact information listed no spouse, just someone with a different last name. Noah's stomach tightened. A pregnant woman alone in this storm? He scanned the area again, more urgently now. "Hello? Elizabeth, can you hear me?" This time he thought he heard something, not from the car but further down the road toward the old barn that hadn't been used in years. Noah trudged in that direction, calling out repeatedly, his voice growing hoarse. The wind shifted slightly, and in that brief moment of clarity, he heard it distinctly, a cry for help. Noah broke into as much of a run as the deep snow would allow, his flashlight beam bouncing wildly. The abandoned barn loomed ahead, its weathered doors hanging askew. One had been pushed open recently, fresh tracks led inside, already being filled by new fallen snow. "Hello? I'm here to help," Noah called as he approached the entrance. "In here," came a strained female voice. From the darkness within, "Please, I need help." Noah pushed through the door into the relative stillness of the barn. His flashlight illuminated dust motes dancing in the air, old hay bales, and then a woman. She sat propped against a hay bale, her expensive camel hair coat spread beneath her, her face contorted in pain. Her dark hair was plastered to her, forehead with sweat despite the cold, and her hands clutched her very pregnant belly. Even in distress, her beauty was striking, her features delicate yet strong, like something carved by a master artisan. "Thank God," she breathed when she saw him, her voice cultured undeniably from money and education. "I thought I would die here." Noah rushed to her side, kneeling in the hay. "I'm Noah Miller. I work at the farm up the road. What happened? Are you Elizabeth?" She nodded, grimacing as another contraction seized her. "Elizabeth Harrington, my GPS. Took me down this road as a shortcut back to Silverdale, then the storm. I couldn't see. The car went off the road. I tried to walk, but..." She gestured to her stomach. "The contractions started. I found this place to shelter." Noah's mind raced. Silverdale was the affluent community nearly 30 miles away, known for its gated estates and the kind of wealth he'd only ever seen in magazines. What was she doing out here alone? "We need to get you somewhere warm. My cabin's not far." He glanced at her belly. How far apart are the contractions? Elizabeth's blue eyes, bright with pain, locked onto his. "Maybe 5 minutes now. It's happening too fast. I don't think I can walk that far." Noah ran a hand through his snow-damp hair, thinking fast. "Okay, first things first. Let's see what we're dealing with." He directed his flashlight more carefully around the barn. "This place hasn't been used in years, but it's better than being outside. I'll need to go back to my cabin for supplies. Will you be okay for a few minutes?" Something like fear flashed across Elizabeth's face, but she nodded, jaw tight with determination. "Not like I have much choice, is it?" Despite her situation, there was a hint of dry humor in her voice. "I'll be quick," Noah promised. Then, on impulse, he removed his coat and wrapped it around her. "Take this." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "You need it more than I do right now." Elizabeth started to protest, but another contraction hit, stealing her words. Noah squeezed her hand briefly. "Hang on, I'll be right back." The journey back to his cabin seemed even longer now that he knew what was at stake. Noah moved as fast as the deep snow would allow, his mind churning with what he'd need: blankets, his first aid kit, water, towels. His wilderness first aid training from his construction days covered basic emergency childbirth. But that had been years ago. Still, it was better than nothing. Duke lifted his head when Noah burst through the door, sensing the urgency. Noah worked quickly, stuffing supplies into a duffel bag. He grabbed extra clothes, a battery-powered lantern, matches, his hunting, knife with its sharp blade, string for tying off the umbilical cord, and a clean sheet torn into smaller pieces. He filled 2 thermoses with hot water from the stove and added his extra blankets. As an afterthought, he grabbed the half bottle of whiskey from the cupboard. For sterilization, he told himself, though he knew it might be needed for the pain. The trip back to the barn was grueling. The snow had deepened, even in the short time he'd been gone, and the wind cut through his flannel shirt like it was made of paper. But the thought of Elizabeth alone in that cold barn propelled him forward, one difficult step after another. When he finally pushed through the barn door again, the scene had changed. Elizabeth had moved, now lying on her side on his coat, her designer slacks discarded, her legs covered with what looked like an expensive cashmere sweater. Her face was flushed, her breathing labored. "It's coming," she gasped when she saw him. "I can feel it, the pressure." Noah dropped to his knees beside her, pushing aside his own fear. "I'm here now. You're not alone." He opened the duffel bag and quickly set up the lantern, casting a warm glow around them. He spread one of the blankets on a bed of hay, making it as clean and comfortable as possible. "I need to get you onto this," he said, gesturing to the makeshift bed. With Noah's help, Elizabeth moved onto the blanket. She cried out as another contraction gripped her, more powerful than before. Noah took a deep breath, steadying himself. He'd helped deliver foals and calves before. This wasn't so different, he tried to tell himself, knowing it was a lie. "I'm going to check how far along you are, okay?" he said, voice gentle but firm. Elizabeth nodded, beyond embarrassment now. Noah positioned himself at her feet, moving with clinical detachment born of necessity. What he saw made his heart race faster. "I can see the head," he said, surprised at how steady his voice sounded. "Elizabeth, on the next contraction, I need you to push." Her eyes widened with a mixture of terror and determination. "I can't do this, not here, not like this." Noah met her gaze, unflinching. "Yes, you can. You're already doing it. I'm right here with you." The next contraction came quickly. Elizabeth grabbed Noah's free hand, squeezing so hard he thought his bones might crack. She pushed, face contorted with effort, a primal sound escaping her throat. "Good," Noah encouraged. "Again, when you feel the next one." 3 more contractions, 3 more pushes. The baby's head emerged fully, then the shoulders. Noah worked quickly, supporting the tiny body as it slid into the world. A girl, small but perfect, covered in the evidence of her difficult journey. "It's a girl," Noah announced, voice cracking with emotion he hadn't expected to feel. He quickly cleared the baby's mouth and nose with his finger, then gave her a gentle pat on the back. For a heart-stopping moment, nothing happened. Then the tiny chest expanded, and a lusty wail filled the barn, drowning out even the howl of the wind outside. "She's breathing," he said, relief washing over him. He quickly wrapped the newborn in one of the clean cloths he'd brought, then used his knife, sterilized with the whiskey, to cut and tie off the umbilical cord. Elizabeth half sat up, arms reaching for her child. Noah carefully placed the bundled infant against her chest. The transformation on Elizabeth's face was immediate and profound. Exhaustion giving way to wonder, pain to joy, fear to fierce protective love. "Hello, little one," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "You certainly know how to make an entrance." Noah busied himself with the remaining tasks, delivering the afterbirth, making sure Elizabeth wasn't bleeding too heavily, covering both mother and child with blankets to keep them warm. But his eyes kept returning to the tableau before him, this woman who'd arrived in his life like a force of nature, now cradling her child with a tenderness that made his chest ache. Elizabeth looked up, catching his gaze. Something passed between them then, an acknowledgement, a connection forged in this extraordinary moment. "Thank you," she said simply, those two words carrying the weight of everything words couldn't express. Noah nodded, suddenly self-conscious. "We need to get you both somewhere warmer. Think you can make it to my cabin if I help you?" Elizabeth looked down at her daughter, then back at Noah. "I think I can do just about anything right now." The journey to the cabin was slow and difficult. Noah wrapped Elizabeth in multiple blankets and half-carried her through the snow, the newborn tucked securely inside her mother's coat against her chest. The storm had begun to wane slightly, as if in deference to the new life they carried. When they finally reached the cabin, Duke greeted them with curious sniffs and a wagging tail. The warmth from the wood stove enveloped them like an embrace. Noah quickly arranged his bed for Elizabeth and the baby, adding extra blankets and his only pillow. "It's not much," he said apologetically, looking around at the Spartan cabin with its mismatched furniture and worn rugs. Elizabeth sank onto the bed, exhausted but with color returning to her cheeks. "It's perfect," she said, and something in her voice made him believe she meant it. Noah heated soup on the wood stove and brought it to her in his best bowl. A wedding gift from his former life, one of the few things he'd kept. Elizabeth ate gratefully while the baby slept against her chest, tiny face peaceful despite the dramatic circumstances of her birth. "I still can't believe this happened," Elizabeth said, looking down at her daughter. "When I left the doctor's appointment, I never imagined." She trailed off, shaking her head. "What were you doing out here alone?" Noah asked, the question that had been nagging at him since he found her. "Especially so close to your due date?" A shadow crossed Elizabeth's face. "Running away, I suppose, or running towards something. I'm not sure which anymore." She hesitated, then seemed to make a decision. "I own Harrington Tech. Have you heard of it?" Noah blinked in surprise. Harrington Tech was a household name, a company worth billions. "You're that Harrington?" Elizabeth nodded. "CEO and majority shareholder. My father built the company, and when he died 5 years ago, I took over." She stroked her daughter's cheek with one finger. "Everyone had opinions about my pregnancy. The board members, the shareholders, the press. An unmarried CEO having a baby alone was bad optics, apparently." Her voice took on a bitter edge. "My own mother suggested I take care of it quietly, or at least stay out of sight until after the birth." Noah listened silently, trying to imagine a world so different from his own. "I had an appointment with my doctor in Silverdale today," Elizabeth continued. "She told me I still had at least 2 weeks before delivery. I was driving back to my estate when I just couldn't face it. All those empty rooms, all those people, waiting to tell me how this would affect quarterly projections." She looked up at Noah, her blue eyes direct. "So I took a detour. I wanted to see the mountains, breathe real air, think clearly for once. Then the storm hit." "Quite a detour," Noah remarked softly. Elizabeth's lips curved in a small smile. "I've always been an overachiever." The smile faded as she looked down at her daughter again. "I had all these plans, you know. The perfect nursery, the best nanny, every advantage. And instead, she was born in a barn during a blizzard, delivered by a farmhand I just met." "Life rarely goes according to plan," Noah said. "Sometimes that's a tragedy, sometimes it's a gift." Elizabeth studied his face. "You sound like you know something about that." Noah was quiet for a moment, stoking the fire before he responded. "I had a different life once. Good job, nice apartment, fiancé who loved antique furniture and dinner parties. Then I lost my job when the company downsized, started drinking too much, lost the apartment. The fiancé found someone more stable." "Ah," he shrugged, the old pain dulled by time, but never quite gone. "Ended up here. It was supposed to be temporary, just until I got back on my feet, but something about this place, the simplicity, the quiet, it helped me find myself again. Elizabeth nodded slowly, understanding in her eyes. And now here we are. Here we are, Noah agreed. Outside, the storm continued its retreat, the wind's howl softening to a whisper. Inside the cabin, with the fire crackling and the newborn's soft breaths creating a gentle rhythm, a different kind of quiet settled. The kind that comes when two souls recognize in each other a kindred resilience. Elizabeth yawned, her body finally surrendering to exhaustion. Noah stood, taking her empty bowl. You should sleep, both of you. We'll figure out next steps in the morning. What about you? Elizabeth asked, already sinking deeper into the pillow. I'll take the chair. I've slept in worse places. As Noah turned to go, Elizabeth's voice stopped him. Noah, what's your favorite name? He turned back, surprised by the question. For what? For her, Elizabeth said, nodding to the sleeping infant. She wouldn't be here without you. I'd like your input. Noah felt something warm unfurl in his chest. My grandmother's name was Hope, he said after a moment. Always thought it was a good name. Strong but gentle. Elizabeth smiled, her eyes already closing. Hope, she repeated softly. I like that. Hope Harrington. Her voice drifted as sleep claimed her. A new beginning. Noah settled into the old armchair, Duke curling at his feet. His eyes rested on the two figures on his bed, the powerful CEO and her tiny daughter, both vulnerable, both extraordinary. Something had changed tonight, not just for them, but for him. He wasn't sure what tomorrow would bring when the roads cleared and reality returned. But for now, in this moment, it was enough to be here, keeping watch, part of something unexpectedly meaningful. Outside, the storm had passed completely. The moon broke through the clouds, casting silver light across the snow-covered landscape. Inside the cabin, Hope Harrington took her first dreams in a world that had already shown her both its harshness and its unexpected grace. And two people from vastly different worlds dozed in the same small room, connected by a night neither would ever forget. The night a blizzard changed the course of 3 lives forever. The morning light filtered through the frosted windows of Noah's cabin, casting a soft glow over the sleeping figures. Elizabeth stirred first, momentarily disoriented by the unfamiliar surroundings, the rough-hewn log walls, the worn patchwork quilt, the scent of pine and wood smoke. Then she felt the warm bundle against her chest, and reality rushed back. Her daughter, the storm, the farmhand who had saved them both. She glanced across the small room to where Noah slept in an old armchair, his long frame awkwardly folded, into the insufficient space, his breathing deep and even. In the light of day, she could see him more clearly than she had through last night's pain and fear. His face was tanned from outdoor work, with lines at the corners of his eyes that spoke of squinting against the sun. Dark stubble shadowed his jaw, and his hands, even in sleep, looked strong and capable. Not the manicured hands of the executives and investors she usually dealt with, but hands that built things, fixed things, delivered babies in snowstorms. As if sensing her gaze, Noah's eyes opened. For a moment, they simply looked at each other across the quiet cabin, acknowledging, without words, the extraordinary night they had shared. How is she? Noah asked, voice rough with sleep as he nodded toward the baby. Elizabeth looked down at her daughter's face, still marveling at the tiny features that seemed both strange and familiar. Sleeping. Perfect. She hesitated. I don't think Hope suits her. Noah's expression softened. Hope, he repeated, and the name hung in the air between them like a promise. The baby chose that moment to stir, her tiny face scrunching as she let out a cry that seemed impossibly loud for such a small being. Elizabeth's body responded instinctively, though her mind still felt uncertain about this new role of motherhood. Noah stood, stretching his tall frame. "I'll give you some privacy and see about making some breakfast." He moved to the wood stove, adding logs with practiced efficiency before heading to the small kitchenette. Elizabeth attended to Hope, awkwardly at first, then with growing confidence. By the time Noah returned with 2 steaming mugs, she had the baby contentedly nursing. "Coffee," he said, setting one mug on the small table beside the bed. "It's just the instant kind, I'm afraid." Elizabeth accepted it gratefully with her free hand. Right now, instant coffee seems like the height of luxury. She took a sip and sighed appreciatively. "The storm stopped?" Noah nodded, moving to the window. "Roads are still buried, though. Phone lines are down too. They always go in storms like this. Cell service out here is spotty on good days, non-existent in weather like this." Elizabeth frowned, a flicker of worry crossing her face. "So we're still stranded? For a while at least. Plows will get to the main roads first. This far out." He shrugged. "Could be another day or so, but we're okay. I've got supplies, heat, food." Elizabeth nodded slowly, absorbing this information. In her world, problems were solved with money, with power, with a single phone call. Out here, none of that mattered. She was utterly dependent on this stranger and his kindness. "I should check on your vehicle later," Noah said, moving to the stove where a pot of something was beginning to simmer. "See if I can get it running. Might need to dig it out first." "Thank you," Elizabeth said, the words feeling inadequate, for everything he had done. She watched as he stirred the pot, his movements efficient, unhurried. "Do you always take in stranded millionaires and deliver their babies, or am I a special case?" Noah's lips quirked in a half-smile. "You're the first, though we did have a lost hiker last summer, and I helped the Hendersons' cat give birth in their barn once." Elizabeth laughed, then winced slightly at the pull of sore muscles. "So I rank somewhere between lost hiker and cat. Good to know." Noah brought over 2 bowls of oatmeal, simple but fragrant with cinnamon. "You rank as the most unexpected thing that's happened in Clearwater County in decades," he said, his tone light but his eyes serious. "How are you feeling, really?" Elizabeth considered the question as she balanced the bowl and the baby. Sore, tired, overwhelmed. She looked down at Hope. Amazed, grateful. She met his gaze again, trying not to think about the fact that there should have been medical professionals, sterile equipment, painkillers. "But there wasn't," Noah said gently, "and you both made it through anyway." Elizabeth nodded, feeling tears prick unexpectedly at her eyes. "Hormones," she told herself, "just hormones," but she knew it was more than that. Something profound had shifted in her world, and it wasn't just the arrival of her daughter. They ate in companionable silence, interrupted only by Hope's occasional noises and Duke's snoring from his place by the stove. When they were finished, Noah took the bowls and refilled their coffee mugs. "I need to check on the animals," he said. "The barn's not far, but I'll need to clear a path. Will you be all right here for a while?" "We'll be fine," Elizabeth assured him, surprised to find she meant it. In this simple cabin, with her daughter in her arms, she felt a strange sense of security that had been missing in her grand estate with its security systems and staff. After Noah left, bundled against the cold, Elizabeth gently laid Hope in the makeshift bassinet Noah had created from a drawer lined with soft blankets. The baby settled easily, sated and warm. Elizabeth took the opportunity to explore the cabin more thoroughly. It was small, but surprisingly well organized. One main room served as kitchen, living area, and bedroom, with a bathroom just large enough for the essentials through a door at the back. The furnishings were mismatched, but functional. The worn armchair where Noah had slept, a small table with 2 chairs, shelves filled with books and a few practical items. Nothing fancy, but everything necessary. What caught Elizabeth's attention were the books. They weren't what she'd expected a farmhand to read: philosophy, classics, books on architecture and design. On one shelf stood a few framed photographs. Noah with a woman, both smiling. Noah in a hard hat at what looked like a construction site. An older couple who might have been his parents. Elizabeth felt a twinge of guilt at this invasion of privacy, but also a growing curiosity about the man who had delivered her child. He clearly had a story more complex than she'd assumed. She was sitting in the armchair, hope asleep against her chest, when Noah returned nearly an hour later. Snow dusted his coat and hat, his cheeks ruddy from the cold. "Animals are fine," he reported, stamping his feet and hanging up his outer layers. "The barn's solid. Path to the main house is blocked by drifts taller than me, but I managed to... Check your SUV." He hesitated. "Battery's dead from the horn, but that's not the worst of it. You slid off pretty good. Front axle looks damaged. Even if we get it dug out, it's not going anywhere without a tow." Elizabeth absorbed this news with a calmness that surprised her. A week ago, she would have been making calls, demanding immediate assistance, activating contingency plans. Now, she simply nodded. "So we wait," she said. "We wait," Noah agreed. "But I did manage to get the emergency radio working. Weather report says plows should reach the county roads by tomorrow, and I found these in the barn." He held up a small cloth bag. "Mrs. Wilkinson kept a box of baby things from when her grandkids visited. They're a bit old, but clean." He handed her the bag. Inside were a few cloth diapers, a tiny knitted cap, and a soft flannel blanket. Elizabeth touched them reverently. "These are perfect, thank you." Noah nodded, looking slightly embarrassed by her gratitude. "How is she doing?" he asked, nodding toward Hope. "Remarkably well for someone who made such a dramatic entrance." Elizabeth smiled down at her daughter, far more adaptable than her mother, apparently. Noah's eyes crinkled at the corners when he smiled. "You're doing fine. Most people would be falling apart after what you've been through." "I'm good. In a crisis," Elizabeth said. "It's the aftermath I'm not sure about." Noah seemed to understand she wasn't just talking about the birth. He moved to the wood stove, adding another log. "Hungry? I could make some soup." "I can help," Elizabeth said, carefully rising with Hope still against her chest. "I'm not completely useless in a kitchen despite what my housekeeper might tell you." Noah raised an eyebrow. "You cook." "I can chop vegetables without losing a finger," Elizabeth said with mock indignation, "and I make a mean cup of tea." Thus began a strange domestic dance in the small cabin kitchen. Noah heating stock and finding vegetables from his cold storage box. Elizabeth one-handedly slicing carrots at the table, Hope sleeping peacefully through it all. They talked as they worked, small things at first. The weather, the baby, the animals Noah cared for. But gradually, the conversation deepened. "So what made you decide to have a baby on your own?" Noah asked as he stirred the pot. "If you don't mind me asking." Elizabeth considered the question, surprised to find she didn't mind. "It wasn't the original plan. I was engaged, actually. Thomas was the CFO of a tech startup we acquired." She shook her head, remembering. "Perfect. On paper. Our merger, as the business press called it, would have created a formidable power couple." "But," Noah prompted, "but I discovered he was more interested in merging with my company than with me," Elizabeth said, her tone matter-of-fact. "When I confronted him, he didn't even bother denying it, just said it was a smart business move either way." She glanced down at Hope. "I was already pregnant by then. He made it clear he wasn't interested in fatherhood unless it came with controlling interest in Harrington Tech. I showed him the door." Noah's face darkened. "Good riddance. My thoughts exactly." Elizabeth passed him the chopped carrots. "What about you? You mentioned a fiancé." Noah was quiet for a moment, focusing on adding the vegetables to the pot. "Rebecca," he finally said. "We were together for 4 years, had it all planned out, the wedding, the house in the suburbs, kids someday." His voice held no bitterness, just a quiet acceptance. "When I lost my job, I lost my way for a while. Started drinking too much, pushed her away. By the time I got my head straight, she'd moved on. Last I heard, she married a dentist." "I'm sorry," Elizabeth said softly. Noah shrugged. "Don't be. She deserved better than what I was then." He gestured around the cabin. "And this place, it gave me a chance to rebuild, different foundation this time." They ate the soup at the small table, Hope now awake and alert in the drawer bassinet beside them. The conversation flowed easily, as if they were old friends catching up rather than strangers thrown together by circumstance. Elizabeth found herself telling Noah things she rarely shared with anyone: her complicated relationship with her late father, the loneliness of being a female CEO in a male-dominated industry, her secret fear that she wouldn't know how to be a good mother. "That last one's universal," Noah assured her. "My sister has 3 kids, and she says she still wakes up some days, wondering when the real adults are going to show up and take over." Elizabeth laughed. "That's exactly it. I run a company worth billions, but the idea of being responsible for one tiny human terrifies me." "You're already doing it," Noah pointed out, "and she seems pretty content with your performance so far." As if on cue, Hope began to fuss. Elizabeth picked her up, still marveling at how natural it felt to hold her, despite having no practical experience with babies. Noah watched them with a soft expression that made Elizabeth's heart do an unexpected flip. "What?" she asked, catching his gaze. "Nothing," he said, then seemed to reconsider. "Just, you don't look like a terrified CEO right now. You look like a mother." The simple observation touched Elizabeth more deeply than any elaborate compliment she'd ever received at a corporate gala or board meeting. Before she could respond, Hope's fussing escalated to a full cry. "Someone needs a change," Noah observed, rising to clear the dishes. "Everything you need should be in that bag. I'll give you some space." "You don't have to keep doing that," Elizabeth said. "It's your home, and after last night, I think we're well past worrying about modesty." Noah's smile was warm. "Fair point. But I should check the radio again anyway, see if there's any update on the roads." While he was outside, Elizabeth attended to Hope, talking softly to her daughter as she worked. "That nice man saved us both," she told the baby. "I'm not sure what we would have done without him. He's not what I expected, you know, out here in the middle of nowhere." She secured the cloth diaper, pleased with her handiwork. "He's kind and smart, reads philosophy, can deliver babies and make soup, quite the combination." Hope blinked up at her, dark blue newborn eyes still unfocused but somehow wise. Elizabeth felt a surge of love so powerful it almost hurt. "We're going to be okay," she whispered, making it a promise. "You and me, we'll figure it out together." Noah returned with news. The plows were making good progress, and if the weather held, they might reach the turnoff to the Wilkinson farm by late tomorrow. Elizabeth felt a conflicting rush of relief and something like regret. Of course, she needed to get Hope to a doctor to return to her life and responsibilities, but there was something peaceful about this snowbound interlude that she was reluctant to leave behind. As evening approached, the cabin grew chilly again. Noah built up the fire and brought out a worn deck of cards. "Not much in the way of entertainment out here," he apologized. "No TV, internet's down with the phone lines. But I'm a decent gin rummy player if you're interested." Elizabeth smiled. "Prepare to be humbled. My father believed card skills were essential for business negotiations. I've been playing since I was 7. They set up at the small table, Hope sleeping nearby. Elizabeth proved as good as her word, winning the first 3 hands handily. Noah took the next 2, and they settled into a comfortable rhythm, talking as they played. "You're good at this," Noah admitted after she won another hand. "Strategy, reading the other player." He gathered the cards to shuffle again. "Makes sense, given what you do." Elizabeth watched his hands as he shuffled, strong and sure with the cards. "What about you? Construction doesn't seem like it would involve much card playing." "No, but the military did," Noah said. 4 years in the Army Corps of Engineers before college. You learn to play cards when you're deployed. Not much else to do sometimes." "The military," Elizabeth repeated, adding this new piece to her evolving picture of him. "Is that where you learned your first aid skills?" Noah nodded. "Basic medical training. Never thought I'd use it to deliver a baby, though." Their eyes met across the table, the shared memory of last night hanging between them, the fear, the pain, the ultimate triumph. Something shifted in the atmosphere, a charge that hadn't been there before. Noah cleared his throat, breaking the moment. "Your deal," he said, pushing the cards toward her. They played until Hope needed feeding again. Then Noah made tea while Elizabeth nursed. The domestic routine felt strangely comfortable, as if they'd been doing this dance for years instead of hours. "You mentioned rebuilding on a different foundation," Elizabeth said, as they sat in the gathering darkness, the cabin illuminated only by the fire and a single lamp. "What did you mean?" Noah was quiet for a long moment, staring into his mug. "When I lost everything, it made me reconsider what everything really meant," he said finally. "I had defined myself by my career, my possessions, my relationship, all external things. When they were gone, I didn't know who I was anymore." Elizabeth nodded, understanding all too well. "And now I know that nothing external is guaranteed. Jobs end, relationships change, things break." His eyes met hers across the small space. "The only foundation that lasts is what you build inside yourself." The simplicity and truth of his words resonated deeply with Elizabeth. How much of her own identity was wrapped up in Harrington Tech, in her wealth, in her position? If those were taken away, who would she be? She looked down at Hope, now sleeping again after nursing. This tiny person didn't care about quarterly reports or stock prices. To her, Elizabeth was simply mother, provider of warmth, food, comfort. The thought was both terrifying and liberating. "I've never really considered that," she admitted. "My whole life has been about the company, about living up to my father's legacy." "And now?" Noah echoed her earlier question. Elizabeth stroked Hope's cheek with one finger. "Now I have a new legacy to consider." The night deepened around the cabin, stars emerging in a clear sky, the temperature dropping again outside. Inside, the fire crackled. Duke snored softly by the hearth, and the small sounds of a newborn baby created a gentle soundtrack. Noah insisted Elizabeth keep the bed. "You need real rest," he said firmly. "No arguments. I've slept in that chair before. I'll do it again." Too exhausted to protest, Elizabeth settled under the blankets, Hope in her makeshift bassinet close by. But as Noah turned to head for the chair, she reached out and caught his hand. "Thank you," she said softly. "Not just for last night, but for today, for making this feel normal somehow." Noah's hand was warm around hers. "Get some sleep," he said gently. "Tomorrow will be here soon enough." As Elizabeth drifted off, she found herself thinking of that morning after the blizzard, when she'd first seen Noah clearly in the daylight. She'd been wrong to think of him as a simple farmhand. He was far more complex, more interesting than any of the polished, ambitious men in her usual circle. And for the first time in her adult life, she wondered if she'd been looking for the wrong things all along. "In the depths of the night," Hope cried, Elizabeth stirred, ready to attend to her daughter, but she heard movement first. Noah, already up, lifting the baby carefully from her bassinet. "I've got her," he murmured to Elizabeth. "Go back to sleep." Through half-closed eyes, Elizabeth watched as Noah walked slowly around the cabin, holding Hope against his chest, speaking to her in a low, soothing voice. The tenderness of the scene made her throat tighten. This man who had no obligation to them was caring for her child with a gentleness that spoke of a capacity for love she hadn't expected to find in this remote corner of Montana. She drifted back to sleep with the sound of Noah's voice in her ears, telling Hope about the stars, the mountains, the quiet wisdom of old dogs, and the way spring would transform the snow-covered landscape into a riot of wildflowers. Morning came with a pale winter sun and the distant sound of machinery. Noah was already up, making coffee and feeding Duke. He looked out the window, then turned to Elizabeth with a smile that held both warmth and a hint of something like regret. "Looks like the plows made it through," he said. "Road to the main. House should be clear by noon." Elizabeth sat up slowly, Hope still sleeping soundly beside her. "That's good news," she said, though her tone suggested otherwise. Noah brought her coffee, their fingers brushing as he handed her the mug. "We should get you both to a doctor today. Make sure everything's as it should be." "Of course," Elizabeth agreed. Her mind was already whirring with the logistics ahead, calling her assistant, arranging for a car, dealing with the damaged SUV, explaining her absence, returning to the real world. But as she sipped her coffee and watched Noah move around the cabin, she realized something unexpected. This small, rustic space with its simple furnishings and lack of modern conveniences had begun to feel more real than the rarefied environment she normally inhabited. And this man, with his quiet strength and surprising depth, had somehow become important to her in ways she couldn't quite articulate. Hope woke, announcing her presence with the demanding cry that already seemed familiar. As Elizabeth tended to her, Noah stepped outside to meet the plow and call the main house on the emergency radio. When he returned, his expression was businesslike, but there was a shadow in his eyes that hadn't been there before. "Mr. Wilkinson sending his truck down as soon as the path is clear," he reported. "His wife called the clinic in town. They're expecting you. And I dug your phone out of the SUV. Battery's dead, but you can charge it at the main house." Elizabeth nodded, feeling strangely reluctant to leave the bubble they'd created. "Noah," she began, not sure what she wanted to say. He met her eyes, and for a moment, the mask of practicality slipped, revealing something vulnerable underneath. "You should get ready," he said softly. "They'll be here soon." The preparations were simple. There wasn't much to pack or arrange. Noah found an old duffel bag for the baby supplies. Elizabeth dressed in her now wrinkled designer clothes, which seemed oddly out of place in the cabin. Hope was wrapped snugly in the flannel blanket from Mrs. Wilkinson's collection. They were standing by the door when the sound of a truck engine announced their ride's arrival. Noah picked up the duffel bag, but hesitated before opening the door. "Elizabeth," he said, her name soft on his lips. Whatever he was going to say was interrupted by a knock on the door. Noah's expression shuttered, the professional mask returning. He opened the door to reveal an elderly man in a heavy coat. "Morning, Noah," the man said, then peered curiously at Elizabeth and the baby. "Well, I'll be. When you radioed about a woman and newborn, I thought you were pulling my leg. Mr. Wilkinson, this is Elizabeth Harrington and her daughter Hope," Noah introduced them formally. "They've had quite an adventure." The old farmer shook Elizabeth's hand with surprising gentleness. "Ma'am, any friend of Noah's is welcome. At Wilkinson Farm. My wife's got the guest room all ready for you up at the main house, and we've called ahead to Dr. Parker. She'll meet us at the clinic." Elizabeth smiled at the farmer's kindness. "Thank you, Mr. Wilkinson, and thank you for employing such a capable farmhand. Noah saved both our lives." Mr. Wilkinson's weathered face creased in a smile. That doesn't surprise me one bit. This young man's the best hire I ever made. As they walked to the truck, Elizabeth noticed Noah hanging back slightly. When Mr. Wilkinson climbed in to start the engine, she turned to face Noah. "I don't know how to thank you," she said quietly. "No thanks needed," he replied, his eyes serious. "Just take care of yourself and that little one." Elizabeth hesitated, then impulsively reached into her purse and pulled out a business card. "My private number," she said, pressing it into his hand. "When the phones are working again, call me. Let me know how Duke is doing. And the horses." Noah glanced down at the card, then carefully tucked it into his shirt pocket. "Of course," he said, though something in his tone suggested he wasn't sure he would. "I mean it, Noah," Elizabeth said more firmly. "This isn't goodbye, not after everything we've shared." Before he could respond, Hope made a small noise from within her blanket bundle. Noah's expression softened as he looked at the baby. He reached out one finger, which Hope immediately grasped in her tiny hand. "She's got a strong grip," he observed, his voice a little rough. "Like her mother." The moment stretched between them, full of things unsaid. Then Mr. Wilkinson honked the horn lightly, breaking the spell. "You should go," Noah said, gently freeing his finger from Hope's grasp. "The doctor's waiting." Elizabeth searched his face, wanting to say more, but not finding the words. Instead, she leaned forward and kissed his cheek, her lips lingering for just a moment against his skin. "Thank you," she whispered, "for everything." Then she turned and walked to the truck, clutching Hope close to her heart. As Mr. Wilkinson drove them away, Elizabeth looked back through the window. Noah stood in front of his cabin, Duke at his side, a solitary figure against the vast backdrop of snow-covered fields and distant mountains. She watched until the truck rounded a bend and he disappeared from view. In the warmth of the truck cab, with Hope sleeping contentedly in her arms and the promise of proper medical care ahead, Elizabeth should have felt nothing but relief. Instead, she felt a curious emptiness, as if she'd left something important behind in that small cabin with its mismatched furniture and thoughtful, unexpected occupant. Mr. Wilkinson glanced over at her. "Noah's quite a fellow," he said conversationally. "Don't know what I'd do without him these days. My sons all moved to the city, and these old bones can't handle the farm alone anymore." "He seems very capable," Elizabeth agreed, her voice carefully neutral. The old farmer nodded. "Smartest hand I ever hired. Redesigned the irrigation system last summer. Saved us a fortune. Could be doing something far grander than working my land, but he says he's happy here." He gave her a sideways look. "Never seen him look at anyone the way he looked at you just now, though." Elizabeth felt warmth rise to her cheeks. "We've been through an intense experience together," she said diplomatically. "That creates a certain bond." Mr. Wilkinson said, not sounding convinced. "Well, bonds are funny things. Some fade with time and distance. Others just get stronger." As they drove toward the main house and the clinic beyond, Elizabeth gazed down at her daughter's peaceful face. Hope. Such a simple name, but suddenly it felt like so much more. Not just a name, but a possibility, a beginning, a path forward she hadn't anticipated. The road ahead was clear now, the snowplows having done their work. But Elizabeth found herself looking back, thinking of a small cabin in the woods and the man who had helped her deliver not just a baby, but perhaps a new vision for her life. One that couldn't be measured in stock prices or corporate acquisitions, but in moments of genuine connection and unexpected joy. Elizabeth Harrington had always known exactly where she was going. But as she cradled her newborn daughter and left the farmhand's cabin behind, she wondered if perhaps, for the first time in her carefully planned life, getting lost might have led her exactly where she needed to be. The Wilkinson farmhouse stood in stark contrast to Noah's humble cabin. A sprawling two-story structure with a wide front porch and large windows that gleamed in the winter sunlight. Inside, warmth emanated from a modern heating system, and the rooms were filled with comfortable, well-worn furniture that spoke of generations of family life. Mrs. Wilkinson, a silver-haired woman with kind eyes and capable hands, greeted Elizabeth, and Hope with a motherly concern that both comforted and overwhelmed Elizabeth. She was quickly ushered to a guest bedroom with a proper crib that Mrs. Wilkinson declared had been used by all 7 of her grandchildren. "You rest, dear," the older woman insisted, gently taking Hope from Elizabeth's arms. "I raised 5 children of my own. I can watch this little one while you take a hot shower." Too exhausted to argue, Elizabeth accepted the offer. Standing under the hot spray of the farmhouse's surprisingly modern bathroom, she felt the tension of the past days begin to melt away. Yet as her body relaxed, her mind raced. She thought of Noah, alone again in his cabin, of the board meeting scheduled for tomorrow that she would inevitably miss, of the media speculation that would surely follow when news broke that Elizabeth Harrington had disappeared during a blizzard and given birth in a barn. Wrapped in a borrowed robe, Elizabeth returned to the guest room to find Mrs. Wilkinson rocking Hope gently in a chair by the window. The older woman looked up with a smile. "She's a beautiful baby," Mrs. Wilkinson said. "Strong, too. Hard to believe she's only a day old." Elizabeth sat on the edge of the bed, feeling a strange mixture of pride and uncertainty. "We were lucky. If Noah hadn't found us..." Mrs. Wilkinson nodded. "The Lord puts the right people in our path when we need them most." She studied Elizabeth's face. "Noah said you were caught in the storm, but he didn't say what brought you out this way in the first place. We don't get many visitors from the city, especially not in winter." There was no judgment in the question, only gentle curiosity. Elizabeth found herself wanting to answer honestly. "I was running away," she admitted, "or perhaps towards something. I'm not entirely sure which." Mrs. Wilkinson nodded as if this made perfect sense. "Sometimes the heart knows what it needs, before the head catches up." She rose, carefully transferring the now sleeping Hope to Elizabeth's arms. "Dr. Parker will be here in an hour. I've made some lunch downstairs whenever you're ready." Left alone with her daughter, Elizabeth felt an unfamiliar sense of peace. Here, in this farmhouse far from her usual world, no one expected anything from her except to care for her child. No board members demanding explanations for her choices. No press dissecting her every move. No mother critiquing her decisions. Just the simple, profound act of holding her daughter. Her phone, now charged, lay on the bedside table. Elizabeth picked it up reluctantly, already dreading the barrage of notifications. 93 missed calls, 172 text messages, dozens of emails marked urgent, the outside world clamoring for her attention. With a sigh, she dialed her assistant first. "Ms. Harrington!" Megan's voice was frantic with relief. "Thank God! We've been calling hospitals, police stations. We thought you'd been in an accident." "I'm fine, Megan," Elizabeth said, trying to project calm. "There's a lot to explain, but the short version is that I got caught in the storm and I had the baby." The silence on the other end lasted several seconds. Then, "The baby? But you weren't due for another 2 weeks." "Apparently Hope had other plans," Elizabeth said, smiling down at her sleeping daughter. "Hope," Megan repeated. "So it's a girl. Are you both okay? Where are you? I can send a car." "We're both fine. I'm at a farm near Clearwater. The local doctor is coming to check on us soon. I'll need a car tomorrow, not today." Elizabeth made the decision as she spoke. One more day of peace before facing the chaos that awaited her. After reassuring Megan and instructing her to handle the most pressing matters, Elizabeth called her mother. "Elizabeth?" Victoria Harrington's voice was cool, controlled. "I assume you have an explanation for disappearing in the middle of a crisis." "Hello to you too, Mother," Elizabeth replied, equally cool. "Yes, I'm fine, thank you for asking. And you have a granddaughter now." Another silence, this one tighter with unspoken tensions. "I see. And where exactly did this happen?" "The hospital had no record of your admission." Elizabeth took a deep breath. "It's a long story, Mother, one I'd rather tell you in person. But the short version is that Hope was born during the blizzard, in a barn, delivered by a farmhand named Noah." Her mother's sharp intake of breath was audible. "A barn? Elizabeth, please tell me you're joking." "I have never been more serious," Elizabeth said firmly. "And before you say anything else, I want you to know that both Hope and I are perfectly healthy, thanks to Noah's help. So whatever concerns you have about optics or public relations, they can wait." Victoria was quiet for a moment. When she spoke again, her voice had softened slightly. "I was worried about you, Elizabeth. Whatever you might think of me, I do care." Elizabeth closed her eyes, feeling the familiar complexity of her relationship with her mother. "I know," she said quietly. "I'll call you tomorrow with more details. Right now, I need to rest." After ending the call, Elizabeth laid the phone face down on the table. The outside world could wait. Right now, this farmhouse, this room, this moment with her daughter, this was her reality. Dr. Parker arrived as promised, a no-nonsense woman in her 50s with capable hands and a reassuring manner. She examined both Elizabeth and Hope thoroughly, listening to Elizabeth's account of the birth with professional interest. "Well," she concluded, packing up her instruments, "you both appear to be doing remarkably well, all things considered. The farmhand did a good job. Clean cut on the cord, proper delivery of the placenta." She smiled at Elizabeth. "You were very lucky." "I know," Elizabeth said softly, cradling Hope. "Will we be able to travel tomorrow? I need to get back to Silverdale." Dr. Parker considered this. "I don't see why not, as long as the roads are clear. Just take it easy for the next few weeks. No strenuous activity. And I want to see you and the baby for a follow-up next week." She scribbled on a prescription pad. "Here's my number. Call me any time if you have concerns." After the doctor left, Elizabeth joined the Wilkinsons for a simple but hearty lunch of homemade soup and fresh bread. They were kind, asking few questions, but offering much in the way of practical advice about newborns. Elizabeth found herself warming to them, especially when Mr. Wilkinson spoke about Noah. "Known him 3 years now," the old farmer said, buttering a slice of bread. "Best help I've ever had. Wouldn't have managed to keep this place going without him." "How did you meet him?" Elizabeth asked, curious about the parts of Noah's story she still didn't know. "Found him at a diner in town," Mrs. Wilkinson answered. "George was complaining about not being able to find help, and this young man at the next table spoke up, said he was looking for work, had no farming experience, but he learned quick. He mentioned he was in construction before," Elizabeth said, "and the military." Mr. Wilkinson nodded. "Army Corps of Engineers, smart as a whip. Could be making a whole lot more money doing just about anything else, but he seems to prefer the quiet out here." He glanced at Elizabeth with shrewd eyes. "Said you're some kind of business executive?" "I run a technology company," Elizabeth confirmed, deliberately understating her position. "Harrington Tech," Mrs. Wilkinson said, surprising her. "I recognized you from a magazine article. My grandson works in tech, follows all that stuff." Elizabeth tensed, waiting for their attitude to change now that they knew who she was. But Mrs. Wilkinson simply offered her more soup, and Mr. Wilkinson continued talking about his plans for spring planting as if she were any other guest. That evening, after a simple dinner, Elizabeth sat in the rocking chair by the guest room window, feeding Hope, and looking out at the snow-covered landscape. In the distance, she could just make out the roof of Noah's cabin, a thin wisp of smoke rising from the chimney. Was he thinking of them, or was he simply relieved to have his quiet life back? A soft knock on the door interrupted her thoughts. Mrs. Wilkinson entered with a steaming cup of tea. "Thought you might like this," she said, setting the cup on the bedside table. "Helps with milk production." "Thank you," Elizabeth said sincerely, "for everything. Your hospitality has been extraordinary." Mrs. Wilkinson waved away the thanks. "That's just how we do things out here." She paused, watching Elizabeth feed hope. "You know, I was terrified when I had my first. Felt like I had no idea what I was doing." Elizabeth looked up, surprised by this admission. "How did you manage?" "One day at a time," the older woman said simply. "And I wasn't alone, neither are you." Elizabeth thought of her expansive, empty estate waiting for her in Silverdale. "Actually, I am," she said quietly. "Hope's father isn't in the picture. My mother and I... It's complicated, and running a company doesn't leave much time for close friendships." Mrs. Wilkinson sat on the edge of the bed. "Seems to me you've already started building a new kind of family. Noah cares for you both. Anyone with eyes can see that." Elizabeth felt a flutter in her chest. "We only just met." "Sometimes that's all it takes," Mrs. Wilkinson said wisely. "My George proposed after knowing me 2 weeks. We celebrated our 50th anniversary last summer." After the older woman left, Elizabeth sat for a long time, thinking about choices and chances, about the strange turns life could take in the space of a few days. One impulsive decision to take a different route home, and her entire world had shifted. She thought about Noah, about his quiet strength and unexpected depths, about the way he had held hope with such natural tenderness, about the look in his eyes when she'd left, as if he were already preparing himself for her absence. Elizabeth Harrington had never been one for impulsive decisions, except for the drive that had brought her here. Her life had been built on careful planning, strategic thinking, weighing every option. But as she looked down at her daughter, she wondered if perhaps the most important things in life couldn't be planned or strategized. Perhaps they had to be felt, followed, trusted. Morning came clear and cold, the sun bright on the snow-covered fields. A car from Silverdale would arrive at noon to take Elizabeth and Hope home. Mrs. Wilkinson had insisted on preparing a proper breakfast before they left, and Elizabeth now sat at the farmhouse kitchen table, Hope sleeping in a borrowed bassinet nearby. "I called Noah this morning," Mr. Wilkinson mentioned as he poured coffee. "Told him you'd be leaving today. Thought he might want to come say goodbye." Elizabeth's heart quickened. "What did he say?" The old farmer's expression was carefully neutral. "Said he had chores to tend to, but he wished you both well." Disappointment washed through Elizabeth sharper than she'd expected. So that was it. Noah had drawn a line, recognizing the fundamental differences in their lives. Perhaps he was right. What place could a farmhand have in the world of a tech CEO? What place could she have in his quiet, simple existence? Yet even as she acknowledged the practical barriers, Elizabeth felt a deep certainty that something significant had been lost, or perhaps had never been given a chance to begin. After breakfast, Elizabeth packed the few belongings she had, her phone, her purse, the clothes she'd arrived in. Mrs. Wilkinson insisted she keep the baby items they'd provided, promising to replace them for when their grandchildren visited. "And you come back and see us sometime," the older woman said warmly. "Both of you. When the weather's better, the farm's lovely in spring." Elizabeth hugged her, unexpectedly moved by the kindness of these strangers who had taken her in. "I'd like that," she said, and meant it. As the hour of departure approached, Elizabeth found herself growing increasingly restless. She kept glancing out the window toward Noah's cabin, hoping to see a figure trudging through the snow toward the farmhouse. But the landscape remained empty, pristine. Mr. Wilkinson noticed her distraction. "You know," he said casually, "I need to check on a fence line down near Noah's place. If you wanted to say a proper goodbye, I could drive you down there before your car arrives." Elizabeth hesitated only briefly. "I'd appreciate that," she said, already reaching for her coat. The drive to Noah's cabin was short, but gave Elizabeth time to wonder what she would say when she saw him. "Thank you again," a polite farewell, or something more honest about the confusing tangle of feelings she'd developed for this man who had entered her life so unexpectedly. Noah was chopping wood. When they pulled up, his back to the road, the rhythmic swing of the axe precise and powerful. Duke lay nearby, head on paws, watching his master work. At the sound of the truck, the dog lifted his head and barked once. Noah turned, axe paused mid-swing when he saw who had arrived. "I'll wait in the truck," Mr. Wilkinson said quietly. "Take your time." Elizabeth stepped carefully through the snow, hope bundled against her chest. Noah set down the axe and walked toward her, wiping his hands on his jeans. "I thought you'd be gone by now," he said, his voice carefully neutral. "The car's coming at noon," Elizabeth replied. "I wanted to say goodbye, properly." Noah nodded, his eyes moving to the bundle against her chest. "How is she?" "Perfect," Elizabeth said, smiling down at Hope. "The doctor said we're both doing well." She hesitated. "Thanks to you." Noah shrugged, uncomfortable with the praise. "You did all the hard work." An awkward silence fell between them. There was so much Elizabeth wanted to say, but the words stuck in her throat. This man had seen her at her most vulnerable, had helped bring her child into the world. How could she just walk away with a casual goodbye? "Noah," she began, not sure where the sentence was going. "It's okay," he said quickly. "You don't have to explain. You have a life to get back to, an important one." There was no bitterness in his tone, only acceptance. It made what Elizabeth wanted to say both easier and harder. "I do," she acknowledged. "But it's not the same life I had before. Hope has changed everything, and so have you." Noah looked up sharply, searching her face. "What do you mean?" Elizabeth took a deep breath. "I'm not entirely sure. I just know that leaving here feels wrong somehow, like I'm walking away from something important." Noah's expression softened. "Elizabeth, you're the CEO of a major corporation. You live in a world I can barely imagine. What happened here, it was extraordinary, but it wasn't real life. Not your real life, anyway." "Maybe that's the problem," Elizabeth said quietly. "Maybe my real life has been missing something essential." Noah stepped closer, close enough that she could see the flecks of gold in his hazel eyes, the tiny scar on his left cheekbone she hadn't noticed before. "What are you saying?" he asked, his voice low. Elizabeth looked up at him, suddenly certain. "I'm saying, I don't want this to be goodbye. I don't know what exactly I'm asking for, but I know I want you in our lives, Hope's and mine." Noah's expression was a complex mixture of hope and doubt. "How would that even work? I'm not exactly boardroom material, and you're not built for farm life." "I don't know," Elizabeth admitted, "but I'd like to find out, if you would." Noah was quiet for a long moment, his eyes never leaving hers. Then slowly he reached out and touched Hope's cheek with one gentle finger. The baby stirred, turning her face toward his touch. "I'd like that too," he said finally, his voice rough with emotion. The honk of a horn broke the moment. They both turned to see a sleek black town car pulling up behind Mr. Wilkinson's truck. Elizabeth's ride had arrived, right on time, as she had arranged. "That's my car," she said unnecessarily. Noah nodded, stepping back. The professional mask started to slide back into place, but Elizabeth reached out and caught his hand. "I meant what I said, Noah. This isn't goodbye." She pressed a piece of paper into his palm. "My address in Silverdale. The phone lines should be working again soon. Call me, please." Noah looked down at the paper, then carefully folded it and tucked it into his shirt pocket, just as he had done with her business card. "Drive safe," he said softly. "Take care of yourself and her." Elizabeth wanted to say more, to make him understand how deeply he had affected her, how the boundaries between their worlds seemed suddenly permeable, unimportant. But the driver was waiting, and hope was beginning to fuss against her chest. "I'll see you soon," she said instead, making it a promise. Then, impulsively, she stood on tiptoe and pressed her lips to his, a brief, tender kiss that said what words could not. Before Noah could respond, Elizabeth turned and walked back to the waiting car. As the driver held the door for her, she looked back one last time. Noah stood where she had left him, one hand raised in farewell, Duke faithful at his side. The drive back to Silverdale was a study in contrasts. The luxury of the town car, with its heated leather seats and privacy partition, felt both familiar and strange after the rustic simplicity of Noah's cabin. The driver, professional and discreet, asked no questions about her unexpected passenger, merely confirmed the address and offered her a bottle of mineral water. As they left the rural landscape behind and approached the affluent enclave of Silverdale, Elizabeth felt a growing sense of disconnect. The manicured estates and luxury boutiques that had once seemed so natural now appeared almost artificial. She thought of Noah's words about foundations, about what remained when external things were stripped away. When the car finally pulled through the ornate gates of her estate, Elizabeth felt a moment of trepidation. The sprawling mansion, with its perfectly symmetrical facade and immaculate grounds, seemed cold, impersonal, a showpiece rather than a home. Inside, everything was exactly as she had left it. The staff had maintained the house in her absence with their usual efficiency. Megan had arranged for a pediatric nurse to be on standby, and the nursery, a showcase of designer furniture and custom murals that Elizabeth had commissioned months ago, awaited its tiny occupant. Standing in the center of the elegant foyer with hope in her arms, Elizabeth was struck by a profound realization. This house, for all its grandeur, had never truly felt like home. It had been a statement, a symbol of her success, but not a place where she had ever felt completely herself. The first week passed in a blur of adjustments and interruptions. Board members insisted on emergency meetings, which Elizabeth conducted via video conference from her home office, Hope sleeping nearby. Her mother arrived with a retinue of suggestions and criticisms thinly veiled as help. The press speculated wildly about her absence and the sudden appearance of a baby, forcing the company's PR team to issue carefully worded statements about her private family matter. Through it all, Elizabeth found herself thinking of Noah, of the quiet cabin where they had weathered the storm together. She waited for his call with an anticipation that surprised her in its intensity. But the days passed, and her phone remained silent. "You should rest," the nurse advised on the 7th day, finding Elizabeth checking her phone for what must have been the 100th time. "The baby is fine. I can watch her while you take a nap." Elizabeth nodded, too tired to argue. In her bedroom, with its king-sized bed and silk sheets, she lay awake, thinking of the narrow cot in Noah's cabin, the sound of the wind outside the windows, the comfortable silence they had shared. Why hadn't he called? Had he changed his mind? Decided that the gap between their worlds was too wide after all? Or perhaps he had never intended to call in the first place, had only been kind to the stranded, vulnerable woman in his care. The thought brought an unexpected ache to Elizabeth's chest. She had faced rejection before, in business, in her brief relationships. But this felt different, deeper. Noah had seen her at her most raw, most real, had helped bring her child into the world. That connection wasn't something she could simply file away and forget. As she drifted into an uneasy sleep, Elizabeth made a decision. If Noah wouldn't come to her, she would go to him. Not immediately. Hope was still too young for such a journey, but soon she would find a way to bridge the distance between their worlds, to see if what she had felt in that cabin during the blizzard could take root and grow in the light of ordinary days. 2 more days passed, and still no call. Elizabeth was in the nursery, singing softly to Hope when Megan appeared in the doorway. "Sorry to interrupt," her assistant said, "but there's someone here to see you. He doesn't have an appointment, and security wasn't sure whether to let him in." Elizabeth's heart raced. "Who is it?" Megan consulted her tablet. "A Mr. Noah Miller. He says you know him." Elizabeth felt a smile bloom, warm and genuine. "Yes," she said, rising carefully with Hope in her arms. "I know him very well. Please show him in." Megan looked momentarily confused by her boss's uncharacteristic enthusiasm for an unscheduled visitor, but she nodded professionally and went to escort the guest. Elizabeth moved to the window, looking out at the manicured gardens below. The late winter sun cast long shadows across the snow, so different from the wild, open landscape of the Wilkinson farm. Would Noah see only the differences between their worlds? Or would he, like her, feel that perhaps those differences mattered less than what they shared? Footsteps in the hallway made her turn. And there he was, standing in the doorway of the nursery, looking simultaneously out of place and exactly right. He wore clean jeans and a button-down shirt instead of his usual work clothes. His hair was neatly combed, his face freshly shaved, but his eyes were the same, warm, direct, honest. "Noah," Elizabeth said softly, her voice betraying more emotion than she had intended. He stepped into the room, his gaze moving from Elizabeth to Hope and back again. "I would have called first," he said, "but I wanted to see you both, to make sure you were okay." "We're fine," Elizabeth said, moving toward him. "Better now." Noah's smile was tentative but real. "Nice place you have here," he commented, glancing around at the luxurious nursery. "Makes my cabin look like a shed." "It's just a house," Elizabeth said firmly. "4 walls and a roof like anywhere else." Noah's eyebrow rose skeptically. 4 walls, a roof, and about 20 rooms too many. Elizabeth laughed, the tension between them easing slightly. "It is ridiculous, isn't it? I bought it because it was expected, the successful CEO in her appropriate setting." "And now?" Noah asked, his eyes serious again. Elizabeth looked down at Hope, then back at Noah. "Now I'm not sure what I want, except that I know I want you to be part of it." Noah took a step closer. "I've been thinking about that, about what you said before you left." He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture she recognized as a sign of nervousness. "The thing is, Elizabeth, I don't know how to fit into your world. I'm not cut out for galas and board meetings and whatever else comes with all this." He gestured around at the opulent room. "I'm not asking you to be," Elizabeth said quietly. "I'm just asking for a chance to see if we can create something new, something that works for both of us." Noah was silent for a moment, considering her words. Then he smiled, a slow smile that transformed his face. "I brought something for Hope," he said, reaching into his jacket pocket. He pulled out a small, carved wooden figure, a horse, simple but beautifully crafted. "You made this?" Elizabeth asked, taking it carefully. Noah nodded. "I've been working on it since you left. Helps me think. Mrs. Wilkinson says it's to be Hope's first toy from her." He trailed off, uncertainty in his eyes. "From her friend Noah," Elizabeth finished for him, understanding his hesitation. "For now, but maybe someday, something more." Hope chose that moment to stir, her tiny hand reaching out as if sensing the presence of someone new yet somehow familiar. Noah touched her fingers gently, and she grasped his index finger with surprising strength. "I'd like that," Noah said softly. "Someday." Looking at them together, Noah, Hope, the little wooden horse that represented the first bridge between their worlds, Elizabeth felt a certainty she had rarely experienced in her carefully controlled life. There would be challenges ahead, compromises to make, differences to navigate, but there was also possibility, connection, the chance for something genuine to grow from the extraordinary circumstances that had brought them together. Outside, the winter sun continued its arc across the sky, casting the snow-covered landscape in a golden light. Inside, in a room designed by professional decorators, but now warmed by an unexpected presence, Elizabeth Harrington, CEO, new mother, woman, at a crossroads, made another impulsive decision, this time not to run away from her life, but toward a new vision of what that life could be. "Would you like to stay for dinner?" she asked Noah. "Nothing fancy, just a meal together, a beginning." Noah's smile was answer enough. "I'd like that," he said. "A beginning sounds just about right." As they walked out of the nursery together, Hope cradled between them, Elizabeth thought of the blizzard that had stranded her, the barn where her daughter had been born, the quiet cabin where she had begun to see herself anew. Sometimes, she reflected, you had to get completely lost to find your way home. Spring came to Montana in a gentle wave of green, rolling across the valleys and up the mountainsides. The harsh winter had given way to renewal, wildflowers dotting, meadows where snow had lain deep, creeks swollen with meltwater, birdsong replacing the howl of blizzard winds. 6 months had passed since the night Hope was born in an abandoned barn during the worst storm in decades. 6 months of careful steps towards something neither Elizabeth nor Noah had anticipated. 6 months of bridging worlds that seemed, on the surface, impossibly far apart. They had started with dinners, sometimes at Elizabeth's estate, where Noah initially felt as out of place as a wolf in a crystal shop, sometimes at small, out-of-the-way restaurants where Elizabeth could briefly escape the constant scrutiny that came with her position. Weekend visits followed, with Noah driving the 3 hours from the Wilkinson farm to Silverdale, often staying in the guest house on Elizabeth's property. For Easter, Elizabeth and Hope had come to the farm. Mrs. Wilkinson hosted a dinner that brought together an unlikely group: the elderly farmers, their visiting grandchildren Noah, and the CEO of Harrington Tech with her infant daughter. The ease with which Elizabeth slipped into the rhythms of farm life had surprised everyone, perhaps Elizabeth most of all. Through it all, Hope grew and thrived, oblivious to the complexities her parents navigated. She was sitting up now, babbling, in her own language, reaching for the world with curiosity and joy. Her eyes had settled into a deep brown like her mother's, but her smile, wide and uninhibited, reminded everyone of Noah. This particular Saturday in May found Elizabeth sitting on a blanket spread beneath an apple tree, in full bloom, on the Wilkinson farm. Hope sat beside her, fascinated by a ladybug crawling across a blade of grass. Noah approached from the direction of the barn, his stride easy, a smile spreading across his face at the sight of them. "There's my girls," he said, settling onto the blanket. He leaned over to kiss Elizabeth, then tickled Hope's round belly, eliciting a gurgle of laughter that never failed to warm his heart. Elizabeth handed him a glass of lemonade Mrs. Wilkinson had prepared. "The meeting went well," she said, answering his unasked question. "We closed the deal with Meridian Tech. I didn't even have to be there in person." The video conferencing setup she'd had installed in the Wilkinson's spare room had been Elizabeth's solution to balancing work with her growing desire to spend more time away from Silverdale. It wasn't perfect. There were still emergencies that required her physical presence at headquarters, but it allowed for a flexibility she'd never imagined possible before Hope's birth. "Congratulations," Noah said sincerely. He had come to respect Elizabeth's business acumen, the sharp intelligence and quiet authority with which she led her company, just as she had grown to appreciate his knowledge of the land, his practical skills, the depth of thought behind his seemingly simple approach to life. "How are the new irrigation channels coming along?" Elizabeth asked, genuinely interested. Noah's redesign of the farm's water system had become something of a local sensation, with neighboring farmers coming to observe the innovative approach that conserved water while increasing crop yields. "Ahead of schedule," Noah reported with satisfaction. "Mr. Wilkinson's already talking about implementing Phase 2 in the South Fields this fall." They talked easily, sharing the details of their day as Hope played between them. To a casual observer, they might have seemed like any young family enjoying a spring afternoon, but the reality was more complex, balanced on careful compromises and growing understanding. The sound of tires on gravel interrupted their conversation. They turned to see a sleek black car pulling up the farm's long driveway, an unexpected and incongruous sight against the backdrop of weathered barns and tractors. "Are you expecting someone?" Noah asked, immediately alert. Elizabeth shook her head, frowning slightly. "No one knows I'm here except Megan and the board." As the car came to a stop, the rear door opened and Victoria Harrington emerged, elegant, as always, in a tailored pantsuit that seemed wildly out of place in the rural setting. Elizabeth stiffened beside Noah, her hand instinctively moving to Hope. "Mother," she said, rising to her feet. "This is a surprise." Victoria surveyed the scene before her, her daughter in jeans and a simple blouse, the baby on a blanket, the farmhand standing protective and wary. Her expression revealed nothing of her thoughts. "Elizabeth," she said coolly, "I needed to speak with you, and your assistant said you'd be here again." The subtle emphasis on the last word carried volumes of unspoken criticism. Noah stepped forward, extending his hand with deliberate politeness. "Mrs. Harrington, I'm Noah Miller. We haven't formally met." Victoria regarded his hand briefly before taking it in a perfunctory handshake. "Mr. Miller, yes, I've heard quite a bit about you." The tension in the air was palpable. Hope, sensing the shift in atmosphere, began to fuss. Noah immediately knelt to pick her up, settling her against his chest with practiced ease. "Perhaps we should go inside," Elizabeth suggested, her professional mask sliding into place. "Mrs. Wilkinson has prepared lunch." The four of them made an odd procession to the farmhouse, Victoria walking stiffly beside Elizabeth, Noah following with Hope, who was now contentedly playing with the collar of his shirt, oblivious to the undercurrents of adult emotion. Mrs. Wilkinson, to her credit, received Victoria with the same warm hospitality she showed everyone who crossed her threshold. Soon, they were seated around the kitchen table, plates of homemade chicken salad and fresh bread before them. Hope sat in a high chair Noah had crafted himself, happily mashing bits of soft bread between her fingers. "So, Mother," Elizabeth said, after preliminaries had been observed, "what was so urgent that it brought you all the way out here?" Victoria dabbed at her lips with a napkin before answering. "The board has concerns," she said bluntly. "Your arrangement has been tolerated for months now, but the Meridian deal is just the beginning. The Asian expansion will require your full attention. Your frequent absences from Silverdale have not gone unnoticed." Elizabeth's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "I've met every obligation, exceeded quarterly projections, and successfully negotiated 3 major acquisitions, all while balancing my responsibilities as a mother. What exactly are the board's concerns?" Victoria's gaze flicked to Noah, then back to her daughter. Your focus, Elizabeth. Your commitment. Your priorities. The implication hung in the air, clear as crystal. Noah remained silent, feeding. Hope small pieces of chicken, but Elizabeth could sense the tension in his shoulders, the careful control he was exerting. "I see," Elizabeth said, her voice cool. "And did the board send you as their official representative, or is this a maternal intervention?" Victoria sighed, a rare crack in her perfect composure. "I'm here as your mother, Elizabeth, and as someone who understands what's at stake. Your father built Harrington Tech from nothing. You've taken it further than even he imagined possible. Are you really willing to risk all that for this?" She gestured vaguely at their surroundings. Before Elizabeth could respond, Noah spoke, his voice quiet but firm. "Mrs. Harrington, with all due respect, I don't think this is what you think it is." Victoria turned to him, one eyebrow raised in elegant skepticism. "Really, Mr. Miller? And what would you know about running a multi-billion-dollar corporation? About the sacrifices required, the focus?" Noah met her gaze steadily. "Not much," he admitted, "but I know about building things to last, about foundations that hold when storms come. And I know your daughter hasn't compromised a single one of her professional responsibilities since Hope was born. If anything, she's more efficient, more focused, more determined." Elizabeth felt a swell of emotion at Noah's words, at the understanding and respect they conveyed. He had never once asked her to be less than who she was, the driven executive, the innovator, the leader. He had only asked that she make room in that identity for other parts of herself as well. "Mother," Elizabeth said gently, "I'm not giving up anything that matters. I'm gaining something I didn't know I needed." Victoria looked between them, her expression softening almost imperceptibly. For all her cool exterior, she loved her daughter, had always wanted what was best for her, even if her definition of best had been narrow, defined by wealth and position and power. "And what happens when the novelty wears off?" she asked, but the sharp edge had left her voice. "When rural charm gives way to rural reality, when board meetings and conference calls compete with whatever it is you do here. We'll figure it out," Elizabeth said simply. "Together, that's what families do." The word hung in the air between them. Families. Not just Elizabeth and Hope, but Noah too. A unit, a connection, a commitment. Victoria looked at her granddaughter, who was now reaching pudgy hands toward her, babbling happily. Despite herself, a smile tugged at her lips. "She has your determination," she observed, reluctantly offering a finger for Hope to grasp. "And your father's eyes." "She has Noah's smile," Elizabeth said softly, "and his heart." Something shifted in Victoria's expression then. A recognition, perhaps, that her daughter had found something real, something valuable, that had nothing to do with stock prices or corporate acquisitions. "Well," she said finally, reclaiming her finger from Hope's grip, "I suppose I should at least get to know the man who delivered my granddaughter in a barn." It wasn't acceptance, not quite, but it was an opening, a small crack in the wall between worlds. After lunch, Victoria surprised them all by accepting Mrs. Wilkinson's offer of a tour of the farm. The unlikely pair set off toward the orchard, Victoria picking her way carefully in her designer heels, Mrs. Wilkinson chatting amicably about apple varieties and honey production. Left alone in the kitchen with Noah and Hope, Elizabeth let out a long breath. "That went better than expected," she admitted. Noah chuckled, lifting Hope from her high chair. "Your mother is formidable." "That's a diplomatic way of putting it," Elizabeth said, beginning to clear the dishes. "But she's not entirely wrong, you know. This arrangement, me here on weekends, you coming to Silverdale when you can, both of us pretending. We don't need to make a more permanent decision. It's not sustainable indefinitely." Noah nodded, bouncing Hope gently as she began to fuss, ready for her afternoon nap. "I know," he said quietly. "I've been thinking about that too." Elizabeth rinsed a plate, not looking at him, suddenly afraid of what he might say. These months together had been a delicate balance, neither of them pushing too hard or expecting too much. But her mother's visit had forced the question they'd been avoiding. What next? "I've been offered a position," Noah said after a moment, "with the Agricultural Extension Office, consulting on water conservation systems for farms across the county based on the work I've done here. It would mean a more regular schedule, benefits." He paused. "The office is in Silverdale." Elizabeth turned, surprise and hope mingling in her expression. "You'd moved to Silverdale?" Noah shifted Hope to his other shoulder, his expression thoughtful. "I've been thinking about what you said months ago, about creating something new together, something that works for both of us." He walked to the window, looking out at the farm that had been his sanctuary, his healing place. "I'll always love this land, this life, but I've realized something important. Home isn't necessarily a place. Sometimes it's people." Elizabeth moved to stand beside him, her hand finding his. "What about your cabin? Your work with Mr. Wilkinson?" "I'd keep the cabin," Noah said. "Weekend getaway. And Mr. Wilkinson's already training his grandson to take over more of the daily operations. This new job, it would let me help more farmers, make a bigger difference, and be closer to you and Hope." Elizabeth leaned her head against his shoulder, watching as Hope's eyes began to drift closed, secure in her father's arms. "It wouldn't be easy," she warned. "My world is complicated, demanding." "So is farming," Noah replied with a smile. "Different challenges, same need for patience, adaptability, faith in the future." He turned to face her fully. "I love you, Elizabeth. You and Hope. I'm not asking you to change who you are or what you've built. I'm just asking if there's room in your life for me to build alongside you." Elizabeth felt tears prick at her eyes, not of sadness, but of a profound, quiet joy. "There's always been room," she said softly. "I think I was waiting for it all my life. I just didn't know what I was waiting for until a blizzard stranded me and a farmhand delivered my baby." They stood together in the warm farmhouse kitchen, Hope sleeping peacefully between them, the future unfolding before them, not perfect, not without challenges, but rich with possibility. Outside, Victoria and Mrs. Wilkinson were returning from their tour, an unlikely alliance forming as they discussed Hope's education and the benefits of rural experiences for child development. The walls between their worlds were not gone, but bridges were being built, connection by connection. That evening, after Victoria had departed with a stiff but sincere invitation for all of you to come to dinner at her home the following weekend, the three of them sat on the porch of Noah's cabin. Hope was asleep in a portable crib inside, monitored by a high-tech device that seemed almost comically out of place in the rustic setting, one of many small symbols of their blended lives. "I have something for you," Elizabeth said, reaching into her pocket. She handed Noah a small box. He opened it to find a key. "What's this?" "A key to the guest house at my estate," Elizabeth explained. "I had it renovated, simplified actually, removed some of the more ostentatious features, made it more you." She smiled. "A place for us to start our life together in Silverdale while we figure out what comes next." Noah turned the key over in his palm, feeling its weight, understanding its significance. "Are you sure?" he asked quietly. Elizabeth nodded. "I've never been more certain of anything." She took his free hand in hers. "That night in the barn, when Hope was born, I thought it was the end of something, my plans, my carefully controlled life. But it was really a beginning, wasn't it?" Noah's smile was tender as he tucked the key safely in his pocket and drew. Her close. "That's the thing about life," he said softly. "The most important journeys often start when we think we're lost." They sat together in comfortable silence as darkness fell over the land, stars emerging in the vast Montana sky. The same stars that had witnessed a blizzard, a birth, a beginning. The same stars that would watch over whatever came next in their unlikely, extraordinary story. 1 year later, on Hope's first birthday, they gathered again at the Wilkinson farm. The apple trees were in bloom once more, the air sweet with promise. A small crowd had assembled to celebrate, the Wilkinsons and their extended family, Elizabeth's mother, who had surprised everyone, including herself, by developing a genuine affection for Mrs. Wilkinson. Several neighbors from the farm, and a few trusted colleagues from Harrington Tech. The guest of honor sat in a high chair decorated with ribbons, delightedly smashing a small cake between her fingers. Hope had grown into a curious, joyful toddler, taking her first tentative steps, babbling a growing vocabulary that included approximations of mama, dada, and duke. The old border collie had become her devoted guardian. Noah and Elizabeth moved among their guests, greeting and laughing, their hands finding each other instinctively in quiet moments. The past year had brought changes, adjustments, compromises. Noah had taken the position in Silverdale, dividing his time between consulting work and weekend visits to the farm. Elizabeth had restructured her leadership at Harrington Tech, delegating more, focusing on strategy rather than day-to-day operations, creating space for her family without sacrificing her vision for the company. They had married in a simple ceremony the previous fall, right where Hope had been born. The old barn, transformed with wildflowers and candles, but still recognizably the place where their journey together had begun. It seemed right somehow to honor the origins of their unlikely connection. Life hadn't been perfect. There had been adjustments on both sides. Noah learning to navigate corporate events and charity galas. Elizabeth adapting to the rhythms and realities of farm life during their frequent visits. There had been raised eyebrows and gossip columns speculating about the farmhand who captured the tech queen's heart. There had been moments of doubt, of wondering whether two such different worlds could truly merge into one shared life. But through it all, they had held on to what mattered, their love for each other, their devotion to hope, their commitment to building something genuine and lasting from the extraordinary circumstances that had brought them together. As the party wound down and guests began to leave, Noah found Elizabeth standing beneath the apple tree where they had sat that day when Victoria first came to the farm. Hope was in her arms, sleepy after the excitement of her birthday celebration. "Penny for your thoughts," Noah said, coming to stand beside her. Elizabeth smiled, leaning into him slightly. "I was just thinking about how different things might have been if I hadn't taken that detour during the blizzard, if I'd stayed on the main road, if you hadn't heard my horn." Noah slipped his arm around her waist. "I like to think we would have found each other anyway. Different circumstances maybe, but the same outcome." Elizabeth looked up at him. This man who had delivered her child and helped her rediscover parts of herself she had forgotten existed. "You really believe that?" "I do," Noah said simply. "Some connections are meant to be." Hope stirred in Elizabeth's arms, her sleepy eyes finding her father's face. She reached for him with complete trust, and Noah took her gently, settling her against his chest, where she immediately nestled into the familiar comfort of his embrace. Behind them, the farmhouse and cabin stood as they had for decades, witnesses to generations of life, love, loss, renewal. Before them stretched the fields and mountains, the vast Montana landscape that had first seemed so foreign to Elizabeth, but now felt like a second home. And between them, in the child they shared and the life they were building, the bridge between their worlds grew stronger every day. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose, Elizabeth took Noah's free hand in hers. Together, the three of them walked toward the cabin, not just any shelter from a storm, but a beginning, a foundation, a home. The blizzard that had stranded Elizabeth Harrington on a rural Montana road had long since melted away, its fury forgotten, in the gentle renewal of spring. But what had emerged from that storm, a family formed against all odds, a love that bridged vastly different worlds, a child named Hope who embodied second chances that would endure through all seasons, a reminder that sometimes the most beautiful journeys begin when we lose our way. And as Noah had once said, in the quiet warmth of his cabin, while a newborn Hope slept nearby, the only foundation that truly lasts is what we build inside ourselves and within the hearts of those we love. 5 years had passed since the blizzard that changed everything. The Montana spring had once again transformed the landscape into a tapestry of wildflowers and verdant fields. At the edge of the Wilkinson property stood a new structure, a modern cabin built with sustainable materials and clean lines, but designed to blend harmoniously with the rustic surroundings. Large windows captured the breathtaking mountain views, while solar panels glinted on the roof. This was Noah and Elizabeth's compromise, a weekend home that honored his love for the land while incorporating her appreciation for thoughtful design and innovation. They split their time between this place and their home in Silverdale, creating a rhythm that allowed them both to pursue their passions while remaining connected to each other. On this particular morning, Noah stood on the porch, coffee in hand, watching as Hope, now a spirited 6-year-old with her mother's determination and her father's easy smile, chased butterflies through the meadow. Her younger brother, 3-year-old James, toddled after her, laughing as he tried to keep up on sturdy little legs. "Careful near the creek, Hope," Noah called, smiling as his daughter waved in acknowledgement without slowing her exploration. The sound of a vehicle coming up the drive turned his attention. Elizabeth's car appeared around the bend, returning from her early morning video conference with the Tokyo office. Even from a distance, Noah could see her face light up at the sight of their children playing in the meadow. She parked and joined him on the porch, accepting the coffee he offered with a grateful smile. "The Nakamura deal is official," she said, satisfaction evident in her voice. "We'll break ground on the new research facility next month." "Congratulations," Noah said, genuinely proud. Under Elizabeth's leadership, Harrington Tech had expanded its focus to include sustainable agriculture technology, a division that merged her business acumen with Noah's practical knowledge of farming challenges. The venture had been wildly successful, bringing innovative solutions to farmers around the world while establishing new environmental standards for the tech industry. Elizabeth slipped her arm around his waist, leaning into him as they watched their children play. "How was your morning?" "Productive," Noah replied. "I finalized the designs for the drought-resistant irrigation system. The prototype should be ready to test on the South Fields by next week." Their professional lives had evolved in ways neither could have predicted that night in the barn. Noah's consulting work had grown into a full partnership with Harrington Tech's agricultural division, where his practical experience and innovative approach proved invaluable. Elizabeth had restructured her company's leadership, creating space for her family while maintaining her vision and influence. It hadn't always been easy. There had been skeptics on both sides, board members who doubted Elizabeth's commitment after she restructured her role, farmers who viewed Noah's partnership with a tech giant with suspicion. But time had proven the strength of their unusual merger, both personal and professional. "Mom, Dad, look what I found!" Hope came racing toward them, her wild curls bouncing, hands cupped carefully around some treasure. James followed, panting with effort, determined not to be left behind. Hope opened her hands to reveal a tiny bird's nest, perfectly formed but empty. "It was under the big pine tree," she explained, eyes wide with wonder. "Teacher says we can bring nature things for show and tell next week." "That's a wonderful find," Elizabeth said, kneeling to examine the nest alongside her daughter. "Do you know what kind of bird might have built it?" Hope launched into a detailed explanation about the different birds they'd studied in her kindergarten. Class, her knowledge both precise and enthusiastic. James, not to be outdone, held up a colorful rock he'd collected, proudly declaring it shiny. Noah watched the scene with quiet joy, his brilliant, accomplished wife engaged in serious discussion with their equally bright daughter about ornithology, their son contentedly examining his treasure. This ordinary moment on a spring morning felt like the culmination of an extraordinary journey. Later that day, as the afternoon sun cast long shadows across the land, visitors arrived. The Wilkinsons, now fully retired but still vibrant in their 80s. Victoria Harrington, who had surprised everyone by becoming a devoted grandmother with strong opinions about the children's education but genuine respect for the life her daughter had built. And several neighboring farmers and their families gathering for what had become a spring tradition. Tables were set up in the meadow between the old cabin, now preserved as a guest house, and the new home. Children ran free, playing elaborate games of their own invention. Adults moved between conversation groups, sharing news, discussing crops, catching up on the rhythms of each other's lives. Noah found himself in conversation with Mr. Wilkinson and Thomas Hayes, a neighboring farmer who had initially been skeptical about the fancy technologies Noah had introduced, but now served on the advisory board for Harrington Tech's agricultural initiatives. "Still can't believe how much has changed," Thomas remarked, looking around at the gathering. "That smart irrigation system of yours saved my west fields during last summer's drought. And now I've got my daughter studying agricultural engineering. Never thought I'd send a kid to college for that." "The world changes," Mr. Wilkinson said wisely. "Best we can do is choose which changes we embrace and which we resist." He clapped Noah on the shoulder with affection. This young man understood that before any of us. Across the meadow, Elizabeth was deep in conversation with Victoria and Mrs. Wilkinson, an unlikely trio that had, over the years, formed a genuine bond despite their different backgrounds. They were discussing plans for Hope's upcoming birthday, each bringing perspectives from their various experiences. Elizabeth caught Noah's eye across the distance and smiled. A private communication that still, after all these years, made his heart quicken. She excused herself from the conversation and made her way to his side. "Everything okay?" he asked as she slipped her hand into his. "Perfect," she replied. "Mother has decided Hope needs horseback riding lessons, and Mrs. Wilkinson is insisting she learn to bake bread from scratch first. They're currently negotiating a compromise schedule." Noah laughed. "And you?" "I'm just enjoying watching them collaborate," Elizabeth said. "5 years ago, I wouldn't have thought it possible." As the evening progressed, the gathering moved closer to the fire pit Noah had built when they first constructed the new cabin. Stars emerged in the vast Montana sky, impossibly bright and numerous. Children roasted marshmallows under careful supervision, their faces glowing in the firelight. Hope sat between her parents, James already asleep in Elizabeth's lap. "Tell the story, Daddy," she requested, as she often did on these evenings. "Which story is that?" Noah asked, though he knew perfectly well which one she meant. "The one about how you found us in the storm," Hope said, settling in more comfortably. "The miracle story." Noah glanced at Elizabeth, who nodded with a soft smile. This story had become their family legend, told and retold, each time with the same wonder as the first telling. "Well," Noah began, his voice carrying in the night air, drawing others around the fire into the tale. "It was the worst blizzard anyone could remember. The wind howled like a pack of wolves, and the snow fell so thick you couldn't see your hand in front of your face." Hope nodded solemnly. though she'd heard this description dozens of times. I was alone in my little cabin, just me and old Duke, when I heard something that didn't belong in the storm. A car horn, far away but desperate. As Noah continued the tale, Elizabeth watched the faces around the fire. Friends and family, neighbors and colleagues, all drawn together by this improbable story that had grown into something larger than itself. A story about finding connection in unexpected places, about bridges built between different worlds, about the kind of courage that says yes to possibility even when the path forward isn't clear. When Noah reached the part about Hope's birth in the abandoned barn, his voice grew softer, more reverent. "And just when we thought we couldn't do it," he said, looking at Elizabeth with eyes full of memory, "this tiny person arrived and changed everything." Hope smiled proudly, always delighted to be the hero of the story. "And that's how our family started," she concluded, as she always did. "That's right," Elizabeth affirmed, stroking her daughter's curls. "That's how our family started." Later, after the guests had departed and the children were tucked into bed, Noah and Elizabeth stood on the porch of their cabin, looking out at the night sky. The same stars that had witnessed their beginning continued to keep watch over there, a journey. "Do you ever wonder," Elizabeth asked quietly, "what would have happened if I hadn't gotten lost that night? If I'd stayed on the main road?" Noah considered this, his arm around her shoulders. "I think about it sometimes," he admitted. "But then I look at our life, at Hope and James, at everything we've built together, and I can only be grateful for that wrong turn." Elizabeth leaned into him, thinking of the long, unlikely path that had brought them here, from a blizzard and a barn to this moment of quiet contentment. From two people from vastly different worlds to partners in every sense, bringing out the best in each other while creating something neither could have imagined alone. "It wasn't really about getting lost," she said thoughtfully. "It was about finding what I didn't know I was looking for." Noah nodded, understanding as he always did. "Life's funny that way. The best journeys often start when we think we've lost our way." They stood together in comfortable silence, watching as a shooting star traced a brief, brilliant path across the heavens. Not a dramatic blizzard this time, but a quiet miracle nonetheless, a reminder that the universe still had surprises in store, even in the midst of a life that had found its rhythm and purpose. Inside the cabin, their children slept peacefully. Outside, the Montana night wrapped around them like a familiar embrace. And between them, in the life they'd built from such unlikely beginnings, the miracle continued to unfold, not in dramatic rescues or desperate moments, but in the quiet, profound joy of a journey shared. The farmhand and the millionaire, the barn in the blizzard, the baby who brought them together. What had begun as a story of survival had become something far more profound, a testament to the power of unexpected connections, of bridges built between different worlds, of the kind of love that sees possibilities where others see only barriers. And as Noah and Elizabeth finally turned to go inside, hand in hand under the canopy of stars, they carried with them the quiet certainty that sometimes getting lost is the only way to find your way home. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.